Dr. Tae Kim wiped sweat from his brow as he climbed down the rocky slopes of Vega 9's western canyon. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, making his expedition suit stick uncomfortably to his skin. This was his third week on the uncharted planet, and so far the wildlife samples he'd collected were disappointing his research team. "Just another hour, then we head back," he said into his comm unit. His research assistant Han acknowledged from their temporary base camp 2 kilometers away. That's when Tae heard it. A low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl but carried pain within its tones. He paused, listening carefully before following, the noise deeper into the ravine. The terrain grew steeper, forcing him to use his climbing gear as he descended. "I'm picking up a large life form reading." Han's voice crackled through the comm. "Be careful. Whatever it is, it's big." Tae rounded, a narrow bend in the canyon wall, and froze. There, pinned beneath a massive pile of rocks from a recent landslide, lay the most extraordinary creature he'd ever seen. It resembled a massive reptile, but with 6 powerful limbs instead of 4. Its scales shimmered with an iridescent blue-green that seemed to pulse with the creature's labored breathing. But what caught Tae's attention most were its eyes, large, amber-colored, and unmistakably intelligent. They fixed on him with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Han, I need the heavy lifting gear," Tae said quietly. "And bring medical supplies." "What did you find?" Han asked. "Something incredible," Tae replied, slowly approaching the trapped creature. "And she's hurt badly." As he drew closer, the beast let out a warning hiss, but Tae noticed it didn't have the strength to truly threaten him. Moving carefully, he saw the creature's swollen abdomen. She was pregnant, very pregnant. "Easy now," he said in a soft voice, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might help. "I'm not going to hurt you." The next few hours passed in tense work as Tae began clearing smaller rocks, working alone while waiting for Han and the equipment. The creature watched his every move, gradually seeming to understand he was trying to help. When Han finally arrived with the gear, he took one look at the massive beast and shook his head. "Director Wan will never approve of this rescue mission. Protocol says we observe and document, not interfere." "Look at her eyes," Tae insisted. "There's intelligence there, and she's carrying young. We can't just let her die." Han reluctantly helped set up the lifting equipment, but their work was interrupted by an urgent call from base camp. "Magnetic storm approaching. All personnel must return immediately. The ship is taking off in 30 minutes, with or without you." On the expedition ship hovering above, Director One's face filled their portable screen. "That's an order, Dr. Kim. The storm will destroy all communications and make rescue impossible for at least 3 days. Then leave me supplies," Tae replied firmly. "I'm not abandoning her." After heated arguments, a compromise was reached. A shelter pod and 3 days of supplies were dropped near the canyon. Han departed with the ship while Tae stayed behind, working through the night with the lifting equipment. By morning, he had freed the creature's lower body. Her wounds were severe but not fatal. Using his limited medical supplies, Tae cleaned and treated the gashes on her scaled hide. The creature remained still during his ministrations, watching him with those intelligent eyes. The magnetic storm arrived with fury, painting the sky with spectacular but dangerous light shows that made all technology unreliable. Tae set up the shelter near the creature, who he began calling Nari. "That means lily in my language," he explained to her, despite knowing she couldn't understand. "Something beautiful and resilient." On the second day, Nari attempted to stand. Her massive body rose shakily, and Tae estimated she was nearly twice his height when fully upright. She took a few stumbling steps toward him, and Tae held his ground despite his hammering heart. Instead of attacking, she lowered her head and made a series of clicking sounds. By the third day, they had developed a rudimentary form of communication. Certain clicks meant water, others food. Tae showed her pictures on his partially functioning tablet, and she seemed to understand the concept of visual communication. That evening, as the worst of the storm began to subside, Nari became agitated. She paced the small area, occasionally looking at her swollen abdomen. Tae recognized the signs. She was going into labor, far from her kind, with only a human stranger for company. "It's okay," he said. preparing the medical supplies he had left. "I'm right here with you." As the storm finally broke and the first stars became visible in Vega 9's night sky, Tai Kim, a man who had traveled across the galaxy to study alien life, found himself becoming much more than an observer. In helping this magnificent creature, in her most vulnerable moment, he had no idea that he was about to change the destiny of two species forever. The magnetic storm howled outside the small shelter, casting eerie purple shadows across the rocky ground. Tay watched anxiously as Nari's massive body trembled with contractions. She had settled into a corner of the cave he'd found after the shelter proved too small for her growing discomfort. "Easy, girl," he whispered, though his voice was nearly lost in the wind. Nari's amber eyes locked onto his, filled with pain but also something that looked remarkably like trust. Tay had delivered calves back on his family's farm as a teenager, but this was entirely different. His xenobiology training had covered reproductive systems of known alien species, but Nari's kind had never been documented before. He was flying blind. "I wish you could tell me what you need," he said, reaching for his medical scanner. The device was barely functioning in the storm, but it confirmed what he already suspected. The first baby was coming soon. Nari let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the cave floor. She stretched her 6 limbs and repositioned herself, digging furrows into the ground with her powerful claws. Her iridescent scales rippled with each wave of contractions, changing from blue-green to a deeper purple. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Tay didn't dare sleep, instead keeping a steady supply of water for Nari and monitoring her vital signs as best he could with his failing equipment. "The ship will be back tomorrow," he told her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth. "Just hang in there." Near midnight, Nari's contractions intensified. She reared back on her hind limbs and let out a cry that echoed through the cave. Tay rushed to her side just in time to see the first egg emerge. Not an egg exactly, but a translucent sac containing a small, curled creature. "Incredible," he breathed, catching the sac carefully in his gloved hands. The membrane was thin and began to dissolve almost immediately upon contact with the air. Inside, a tiny version of Nari unfurled itself, about the size of a house cat, with the same 6 limbs and iridescent scales, though these were softer and paler than its mother's. The tiny creature let out a high-pitched chirp and blinked open, its eyes for the first time looking directly at Tay. There was no time to marvel at this first encounter. Nari was already delivering a second hatchling, and then a third. Tay worked quickly, helping each tiny creature free from its sac, making sure their airways were clear and placing them near their mother. Yet something strange was happening. Each time a new hatchling opened its eyes, they didn't look to Nari. First, they looked to him, their tiny heads swiveled in his direction, tracking his movements with unwavering attention. "They're imprinting," he realized aloud. In many Earth species, newborns imprinted on the first moving creature they saw, but why weren't they focusing on their mother? By the time the 6th hatchling arrived, Tay was exhausted but exhilarated. The storm outside had begun to ease, and first light wasn't far off. The last baby came quickly after, bringing the total to 7 squirming, chirping little creatures. Nari looked depleted but alive. She watched with apparent contentment as her babies explored their surroundings, or more accurately, explored Tay. They crawled over his boots, tugged at his pant legs, and chirped excitedly whenever he spoke. "Your kids seem to like me," he said to Nari with a tired smile. "But I'm not sure that's supposed to happen." Nari made a series of clicking sounds and then, to Tay's surprise, gestured with one of her front limbs, pointing first to the babies, then to him, and then touching her own head. She repeated the gesture 3 times deliberately and with clear purpose. "You're trying to tell me something about them," Tay said, his scientific curiosity overriding his fatigue. "Something about me and them?" The sun finally broke through, the clouds outside casting warm light into the cave. The hatchlings immediately responded to the light, their scales shimmering with colors that seemed impossible. Not just their mother's blue-green, but flashes of gold, pink, and even a deep purple that matched the receding storm clouds. Tay's comm unit suddenly crackled to life. The storm was over and communications were returning. Dr. Kim? It was Han's voice, thick with concern. Do you copy? The ship is returning to your coordinates in 1 hour. Tay grabbed the unit. I copy. I'm alive, but I need you to prepare the auxiliary cargo hold. I've got company. What kind of company? Director Wan's voice cut in. Tay looked at the scene before him. An exhausted alien mother and 7 babies who seemed to think he was the most fascinating thing in the universe. How could he possibly explain this? Remember that creature I was trying to save? She just had babies, 7 of them, and they all seem to think I'm their... Well, I'm not sure what they think I am. The silence from the other end lasted several seconds. Absolutely not, Director Wan finally replied. Leave them. Our mission is to collect samples, not alien pets. Tay watched as the smallest hatchling crawled into his lap and curled up, its tiny body vibrating with a sound remarkably like a purr. Another had found his water bottle and was mimicking the way he'd unscrewed the cap earlier, its tiny limbs working with surprising coordination. They're not pets, Tay said firmly. They're intelligent beings and I won't abandon them. Either we bring them on board, or I'm resigning my position effective immediately. More silence, then Han's voice. Tay, think about what you're doing. But Tay's mind was made up. As the 7 hatchlings gathered around him, chirping and clicking in what almost sounded like conversation, he felt something he hadn't expected, a connection. These creatures in their most vulnerable moment had chosen him for reasons he couldn't understand. Nari made another series of clicks and dragged herself closer, placing one large clawed limb gently on Tay's shoulder. Her amber eyes held a message that transcended language barriers, gratitude, trust, and something else he couldn't quite name. I'm bringing them, he said into the comm. All of them. And I think the scientific community is going to want to hear about what's happening here. As the sound of the approaching ship rumbled in the distance, the hatchlings huddled closer to Tay, and he knew his life had just changed forever. The research station orbiting Vega 9 wasn't designed with alien reptiles in mind. Tay had fought hard to secure a modified cargo bay for Nari and her 7 hatchlings, turning it into a makeshift habitat with heat lamps and a sandy floor. Director Wan had only relented after seeing the hatchlings respond to simple commands from Tai, something that should have been impossible for newborn creatures. They shouldn't be able to do that, Dr. Jin, the station's senior xenobiologist, said as she watched the smallest hatchling, whom Tay had started calling Little One, stack colored blocks in the exact order Tay had demonstrated moments before. Cognitive mimicry at this level typically takes months of development, even in the most advanced species. Tay nodded, equally amazed. And it's not just mimicry. Watch this. He rearranged the blocks into a simple maze and placed a protein treat at the end. Little One chittered excitedly, then paused, studying the puzzle. Instead of trying to reach through the walls of blocks, the hatchling navigated the maze perfectly, on the first attempt. Problem-solving skills, too, Jin whispered. Incredible. It had been 2 weeks since the dramatic rescue, and each day brought new surprises. The hatchlings were growing at an astonishing rate, already tripling in size. Their scales had hardened into beautiful patterns unique to each individual, ranging from deep blue to emerald green with gold flecks. Most remarkably, they followed Tay everywhere he went. If he left the habitat, they would gather at the transparent barrier, chirping frantically until he returned. Even when Nari called to them in her clicking language, they would acknowledge her, but then look to Tai for final approval. It's like they see you as their leader, Han commented during one observation session. Unlike Director Wan, who remained skeptical and distant, Han had become fascinated by the creatures. Not a leader exactly, Tay said, watching as 3 of the hatchlings worked together to build a small structure from the materials he'd provided. It's something deeper. Later that evening, as Tay recorded his daily observations, an alert sounded at the habitat door. The translation program he'd been developing with Jin had finally processed enough of Nari's vocalizations to attempt communication. With excitement bubbling in his chest, Tai activated the system. "Nari, can you understand me?" he asked, the computer converting his words into a series of clicks and rumbles. The large creature tilted her head, then responded with a complex sequence of sounds. The computer processed for a moment before displaying, "Yes, long time waiting talk you, Taze." Heart raced. "Why do your children follow me instead of you?" He asked the question that had been puzzling him for weeks. Nari's answer came slowly, the translation struggling with concepts that had no human equivalent. "You there at emergence. They see you first light. You become part of Mindweb. You are their trail guide now." "Mindweb? Trail guide? I don't understand." Nari approached the barrier separating them, placing one massive clawed limb against it. "My kind, Vora. We connect minds with birth witnesses. Ancient way. Keeps young safe. You were there. You in Web now." Tay struggled to process this. "Are you saying there's some kind of telepathic bond?" The computer translated his question, and Nari made a sound that might have been laughter. "Simple way to say yes. They feel you, know you. You know them too soon." As if on cue, Tay felt a strange sensation, like a whisper at the back of his mind. He turned to see all 7 hatchlings lined up, watching him intently. The feeling intensified, not quite words but impressions, curiosity, affection, hunger. "I can feel something," he whispered. "They're hungry." Nari clicked what the translator interpreted as approval. Bond grows, soon stronger. Over the next few days, Tai experimented with this new connection. He discovered he could project simple images or feelings toward the hatchlings, and they would respond. If he thought about water, they would move toward their drinking pool. If he visualized a specific toy, they would retrieve it. The bond was strengthening rapidly. Sometimes he would wake from dreams filled with colors he couldn't name and landscapes he'd never seen, memories from Nari slipping into his consciousness. "This goes beyond anything in our scientific understanding," Jin told him after witnessing a particularly impressive demonstration where the hatchlings had arranged themselves to form a perfect replica of a molecular structure Tay had been studying earlier that day, without him showing them the image. "I know," Tay replied, both thrilled and slightly overwhelmed. "And there's more. Watch this." He handed Jin a tablet with a complex puzzle game, one that would challenge most adult humans. He had never shown it to the hatchlings. Placing the tablet on the floor of the habitat, he stepped back. 2 of the larger hatchlings immediately approached it. Working together, they began solving the puzzle, their clawed limbs moving with surprising dexterity across the screen. "They're accessing knowledge directly from your mind," Jin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you realize what this means? The implications for interspecies communication are revolutionary." Tay nodded, but something was troubling him. Earlier that day, he'd overheard Director Wan in a private communication with someone from Galaxy Resources Corporation, discussing the exploitation potential of Vega 9 and classifying native life forms as non-sentient fauna. "There's something else you should see," he told Jin, lowering his voice. He pulled up the station's classified files that he'd accessed using his emergency research override. The company knew about the Vora. They've been surveying this planet for months. "Look at this classification." Jin's eyes widened as she read the document. "Non-sentient fauna suitable for habitat clearance? That's absurd. These creatures are clearly intelligent." "Exactly," Tay said grimly. "And there's more. Galaxy Resources is sending a mining fleet. They plan to begin operations within the month." At that moment, Tay felt a sharp surge of alarm through his growing mental connection. He turned to see Nari standing at full height, her amber eyes fixed on the document displayed on his tablet. Somehow she understood. The 7 hatchlings had stopped playing and were now perfectly still, their eyes also focused on Tay. Through the strengthening bond, he felt their emotions, confusion, fear, and something like determination. They know, he realized. They understand what's happening. Nari made a series of urgent clicks that the translator struggled to keep up with. Danger comes. Many Vora below. Must protect. You help? Tai looked at Jin, then back at Nari and her children, creatures that were quickly becoming more family than research subjects. Their intelligence was undeniable, their connection to him growing stronger each day. How could he not help them? Yes, he said firmly, both aloud and through the mental bond he was just beginning to understand. I'll help you. The hatchlings responded with a synchronized chirp, and through the bond, Tay felt their collective response. Not quite words, but the meaning was clear. We trust you, Mind Guide. What had begun as a simple rescue was evolving into something that would test not just Tay's scientific understanding, but his courage and his heart. The morning alarm jolted Tay from a strange dream filled with underground tunnels and thousands of glowing eyes. He sat up, heart pounding, realizing these weren't his memories but images from Nari, glimpses of her home beneath Vega 9's surface. Emergency staff meeting in 10 minutes, announced the station's AI system, interrupting his thoughts. When Tai arrived at the conference room, Director Wan was standing before a holographic display of Vega 9, with dozens of red markers blinking across its surface. Galaxy Resources Corporation has finalized their mining rights, Director Wan announced to the assembled staff. Their fleet will arrive in 7 days to begin preliminary operations. What about our research? Asked one of the junior scientists. We've been instructed to complete all studies and prepare for evacuation, Wan replied flatly. Any specimens we wish to preserve should be catalogued for transport. Tay felt sick. And the Vora, Nari and her children? Wan's expression hardened. Those creatures are classified as non-sentient fauna under Planetary Exploration Code 47B. They'll be transported to the company's xenobiology facility for study. Non-sentient? Tay stood up, unable to contain himself. Director, you've seen the test results. Their problem-solving abilities exceed those of Earth primates. They have a complex language. They can... That's enough, Dr. Kim, Wan cut him off sharply. The classification was made by experts at headquarters after reviewing our data. What data? Tay demanded. I'm the lead xenobiologist on this mission, and I never submitted a final report on the Vora. The room fell uncomfortably, silent. Jin gave Tay a warning look, but he couldn't stop now. I'd like to present new evidence, Tay said, pulling out his tablet. The Vora have a telepathic communication network. They're not just intelligent, they're a sophisticated, sentient species with a society below the planet's surface. Director. Wan's face flushed with anger. This meeting is not a forum for debating company policies, Dr. Kim. Security, please escort Dr. Kim back to his quarters. His access to the alien specimens is hereby revoked. 2 security officers stepped forward. But Tay wasn't finished. He quickly activated his tablet, projecting a video onto the main screen. Footage of the hatchlings solving complex mathematical equations he'd mentally suggested to them. Look at this, he insisted as the security officers approached. They're accessing knowledge directly from my mind through a telepathic link. How can you classify them as non-sentient? Some of the scientists murmured in amazement as they watched the footage. Even the security officers paused, transfixed by the sight of alien creatures writing out complex formulas with their claws. Enough, one shouted, shutting down the projection. This proves nothing except that Dr. Kim has become emotionally compromised. These creatures have clearly imprinted on him, creating a dependent relationship that he's misinterpreting as sentience. As the security officers grabbed Tay's arms, he felt a sudden spike of alarm that wasn't his own, a warning flooding through his mental bond. Something was happening in the habitat. We need to check on the Vora, he said urgently. Something's wrong. One ignored him. Take him to his quarters and lock down his access. The security team was leading Tay toward the door when the station's alarm system blared to life. Red emergency lights began flashing. Alert. Unauthorized access in habitat. Section C. Power fluctuations detected in multiple systems. One's face paled. What's happening? The answer came moments later when the conference room door slid open, revealing Little One. Except the hatchling wasn't so little anymore. In just 3 weeks, it had grown to the size of a large dog, and its scales now pulsed with a strange, electric blue pattern. Behind little one stood 3 of its siblings, each displaying different glowing patterns on their scales. They moved with coordinated precision, their eyes fixed on Tay. "What have you done?" one demanded, backing away. "Nothing," Tay answered truthfully, as surprised as everyone else. Through the mental bond, he felt the hatchling's determined focus and realized with a shock that they had deliberately disabled the habitat's security systems. Little one approached the security officers holding Tay and emitted a high-pitched sound that made them wince and cover their ears. In that moment of distraction, the other hatchlings moved forward, positioning themselves protectively around Tay. "They're trying to help me," Tay realized aloud. The station's computer voice came over the speakers. "Warning. Environmental controls in Habitat Section C compromised. Life support systems rerouting." "This is insane," Juan said, reaching for the emergency comm unit. "Security, full lockdown of—" He never finished the sentence. The lights in the conference room suddenly flickered and died, plunging everyone into darkness except for the eerie glow emanating from the hatchling's scales. When emergency lighting activated seconds later, Nari herself was standing in the doorway, all 2 meters of her impressive form barely fitting through the entrance. The security officers drew their stun weapons, but before they could fire, 2 more hatchlings appeared beside Nari, their scales flashing in a pattern that somehow disrupted the weapons targeting systems. "They can interfere with our technology," Jin whispered in amazement. "How is that possible?" Through the bond, Tay understood immediately. The Vora's scales weren't just decorative, they were capable of generating electromagnetic pulses when needed. An evolutionary adaptation, perhaps, to the planet's frequent magnetic storms. Nari made a series of clicks that Tay understood perfectly now, even without the translator. "We must leave. Danger coming. Many Vora below need warning." "Everyone stay calm," Tay said to the terrified scientists. "They won't hurt anyone. They just want to protect themselves." Director Juan had backed himself against the wall. "This proves nothing except that they're dangerous. When Galaxy Resources arrives, they'll destroy the Vora's home," Tay finished, "and an entire sentient species will be wiped out for mining profits. Is that really what you want on your conscience, Director?" Before one could respond, the station shuddered violently. The computer announced, "Alert. Unauthorized launch sequence initiated in Shuttle Bay 2. Tay felt a tug on his consciousness, an urgent pull from the hatchlings. They were showing him images of a shuttle, the stars, and then Vega 9's surface. They've overridden the shuttle systems, he realized. They're creating an escape route. "That's impossible," one protested. "The launch controls require human authorization." Jin, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Unless they're using Dr. Kim's mental patterns to bypass the security protocols. The bond works both ways. They're not just receiving information from him, they're accessing his knowledge." Nari made more urgent clicking sounds, and Tay felt her fear and determination wash over him. The mining fleet was just the beginning of the threat. If humans discovered the full extent of the Vora's abilities, they would never be safe. "I have to go with them," Tay said, looking at Jin. "They need to warn their people below, and I'm their connection, their trail guide." "You'll be charged with theft of company property," one sputtered. Tay laughed despite the tension. "They're not property, they're people, and I'm going to prove it to everyone." As if on cue, all 7 hatchlings formed a protective circle around Tay and began moving toward the exit, their scales pulsing with light in complex patterns that seemed to confuse and disorient anyone who looked directly at them. Nari led the way, her powerful limbs clearing a path toward the shuttle bay. Behind them, alarms continued to blare as the station's systems fought against the inexplicable electronic interference the Vora were generating. Tay caught Jin's eye as he passed. "Download all our research data. Send it to the Science Council. They need to know the truth before the mining begins." Jin nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Be careful, Tay. And good luck." As Tay followed Nari and her children toward the shuttle bay and an uncertain future, he felt something shift in the mental bond, a sense of purpose and determination that united them all. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The stolen shuttle hurtled through space with Tay at the controls, though. At the controls was becoming a relative term. Little One sat beside him in the co-pilot's seat, its clawed appendages hovering over the navigation panel. The hatchling wasn't physically touching anything, yet the ship responded to course corrections as if guided by an invisible hand. "How are you doing that?" Tay asked, though he partly knew the answer through their deepening mental connection. Little One's scales rippled with patterns of blue and gold, a response Tay now understood as something like a shrug. The concepts flowing back to him were difficult to translate. Something about electromagnetic fields, mental patterns, and technology interfaces. "You're manipulating the ship's computers directly," Tay realized aloud. "Like you did with the station systems." From the cargo area where Nari and the other 6 hatchlings had settled, he felt a warm pulse of confirmation through the bond. Their escape had been narrow. 2 patrol ships from the research station had given chase but mysteriously lost power when they'd gotten too close. Whatever abilities the Vora possessed to interfere with technology were far more advanced than Tay had initially understood. A ping from the communication system interrupted his thoughts. "Incoming transmission from Arcturus Diplomatic Station," announced the shuttle's computer. Tay took a deep breath. Arcturus was their only hope, a neutral diplomatic outpost located at the edge of the system. If they could reach it and present their case before Galaxy Resources' mining fleet arrived, there might be a chance to save the Vora. "Put it through," he said. A stern-faced official appeared on screen. "Unidentified shuttle. You are entering restricted diplomatic space with stolen research property. Power down and prepare to be boarded." "This isn't stolen property," Tay replied firmly. "I'm Dr. Tay Kim, xenobiologist from the Vega 9 research mission, traveling with representatives of the Vora, a newly discovered sentient species whose homeworld is under imminent threat." The official's expression didn't change. "We've received alerts about your theft of experimental animals. Power down immediately or we will be forced to disable your vessel." Tay felt a surge of frustration, both his own and echoed by the Vora. How could he prove their sentience in the few moments before they were potentially fired upon? Suddenly, Little One stood up on its hind limbs and moved toward the communications panel. Its scales began to pulse with complex patterns and the view screen flickered. "What are you—" the official began, but his image was replaced by a split screen showing feeds from multiple news sources across the galaxy. Tay watched in astonishment as video and data from his research began broadcasting across all channels. The hatchlings solving complex problems, Nari communicating through the translator, footage of their coordinated escape. Little One had somehow accessed the shuttle's transmitter and was broadcasting everything at maximum power. "They'll jam the signal," Tay warned, but through the bond, he felt only calm confidence from the Vora. Sure enough, within moments the official reappeared, now looking considerably more flustered. "Dr. Kim, what you're doing is illegal." But before he could finish, Little One's scales flashed brilliantly, and the official's image was replaced by a different view, this time showing the official's own command center, where staff members were gathered around screens watching the Vora footage with expressions of wonder. "They've hacked into their internal cameras," Tay realized with shock. How is that even possible from this distance? The answer came not in words, but in impressions. Through the bond, the Vora's abilities weren't limited by conventional technological constraints. Their connection to electromagnetic fields operated on principles humans had barely begun to understand. The view screen split again, now showing similar reactions from viewers all across settled space. Scientists, politicians, ordinary citizens, all watching the evidence of the Vora's intelligence unfold in real time. Then, most astonishingly, Little One turned to face the camera directly and began to speak, not in clicks or chirps, but in perfect, accented standard language. "People of the Alliance," it said, the voice surprisingly melodic despite coming from a reptilian throat. "We are the Vora. We have lived beneath the surface of the world you call Vega 9 for thousands of years. We wish no conflict. We seek recognition and protection under Alliance Sentient Species Law. Tay stared in disbelief. You can speak our language. How long have you been able to do that? Through the bond came an impression of recent mastery. The hatchlings had been absorbing language from his mind since birth, but had only just gained the physical ability to reproduce human speech. The official reappeared on screen, now joined by several others in formal diplomatic attire. Their expressions had changed completely. Dr. Kim, said a gray-haired woman wearing the insignia of a senior diplomatic envoy, your broadcast has reached the Galactic Council. They're convening an emergency session as we speak. Please dock at Arcturus Station immediately, under diplomatic protection, not arrest. The journey to the docking bay passed in a blur of activity. Through the bond, Tay felt the hatchling's excitement tempered by Nari's caution. This was far from over. As they stepped off the shuttle into the station's main reception area, Tay was stunned to see hundreds of people gathered behind security barriers, craning to get a glimpse of the Vora. News drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting the historic moment across the galaxy. The Council will see you immediately, said a protocol officer who greeted them with a deep bow, directed not at Tay but at Nari. The Galactic Council chamber was a vast amphitheater designed to accommodate representatives from all 10 recognized sentient species in known space. Today, all seats were filled with additional viewers watching from overflow areas. As Ty stepped onto the speaking platform with Nari and her 7 children, a hush fell over the assembly. The council president, a dignified human woman with silver hair, spoke first. Dr. Kim, you stand before us having broken numerous regulations. However, the evidence you've presented cannot be ignored. These creatures, the Vora, Tay corrected respectfully. The Vora, she acknowledged with a nod, have demonstrated abilities that clearly meet our criteria for sentience. But before we proceed, we must address the claims of Galaxy Resources Corporation. Their representatives insist these are isolated specimens that do not represent a genuine civilization. A holographic display activated, showing the mining company's CEO arguing that the planet's surveys had shown no evidence of cities or technology. Nari stepped forward, her impressive height causing several council members to shift nervously in their seats. She looked at Little One, who nodded and stepped to the center of the platform. The young Vora's scales began to pulse with light, and suddenly the chamber's holographic system came alive with images that took Tay's breath away. Vast underground caverns filled with structures built from crystalline materials, thousands of Vora moving through complex tunnel systems, and most incredibly, massive chambers where Vora elders sat in circles, their scales pulsing in synchronized patterns that somehow manipulated the very electromagnetic fields around them. "This is our home," Little One said, its voice now stronger and more confident. "We have no need for the technology you recognize as signs of civilization. Our bodies are our tools. Our minds are our connection. We have lived in harmony with our world for 50,000 years." The council chambers erupted in amazed murmurs. The president called for order before addressing Little One directly. "If your species is so advanced, why have you remained hidden until now?" "We observed," Little One replied simply. "We watched the stars. We saw how different kinds treated each other. We decided to wait until we found the right connection." It turned to look at Tay. "Until we found someone who would see us as equals, not specimens." The debate continued for hours. Galaxy Resources fought hard, bringing in experts who questioned the veracity of the Vora's claims. But the tide had turned. Public opinion across the Alliance was overwhelmingly in favor of the Vora after witnessing their abilities firsthand through the broadcasts. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle began to dim toward evening, the council president stood. "By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, the Vora are hereby recognized as the 11th sentient species of the Alliance. Vega 9, henceforth to be known by its Vora name of Vor-Alath, is designated a protected homeworld with all mining operations indefinitely suspended." The chamber exploded with applause. Tay felt a wave of joy and relief flow through the bond, emotions shared between himself and all 7 hatchlings, with Nari's deeper, calmer satisfaction underlying it all. as the formalities concluded, and they were escorted to diplomatic quarters. An official approached Tai. "Dr. Kim, the Council wishes to offer you a position as humanity's first ambassador to the Vora, given your unique connection to them." Tai looked at Nari and her children. "No, longer scientific subjects, but friends, perhaps even family in some strange way. I'd be honored," he said. 6 months later, Tay stood on the surface of Voralath, watching as a diplomatic shuttle descended from orbit. The first official human delegation to the Vora homeworld had arrived. Beside him stood Little One, now nearly his own height and officially named Bridge in the human records, though Tay still used his nickname in private. "They're nervous," Bridge observed, sensing the emotions of the approaching humans. Tay smiled. "They'll get over it when they meet you all properly." What the delegation didn't know, what no one except Tay fully understood, was that his bond with the original 7 hatchlings had spread in ways no one could have predicted. Every Vora born since that fateful day carried a trace of his genetic signature in their mental pattern, recognized humans instantly as kin rather than strangers. As the shuttle doors opened and wide-eyed diplomats stepped onto the alien soil, they were greeted by hundreds of Vora whose scales rippled in patterns of welcome, patterns specifically designed to make humans feel at ease. "They're not what we expected," whispered one diplomat to another. "It's almost like they understand us before we even speak." Tay exchanged a knowing look with Bridge. The diplomat had no idea how right she was. This unexpected connection between species would prove vital sooner than anyone realized. For beyond the edge of explored space, something was stirring. Something that would threaten all sentient life in the galaxy. But for now, Tay was content watching 2 species take their first steps toward a shared future, all because he had once stopped to help a creature in need.